Story 1. My dog and my grandmother died within a few weeks of each other. My dog got sicker and sicker, and one day he couldn't get up from his bed anymore. So we made an appointment at the veterinarian, and the next day we took him in to put him to sleep so he didn't have to drag on another week or month of suffering and not being able to walk, eat, or drink and die of dehydration. My grandmother had a similar story, except euthanasia for humans is considered immoral. So she lay in a hospital bed, writhed in pain, heard voices, and eventually died of massive organ failure a month later. All I can say after having this parallel experience is, what just happened? Story 2. There are medical cases when it makes sense, like certain illnesses or even when elderly people are in pain and really have no quality of life. They should have the right to control that situation. I watched my husband's grandmother dying and begging us to just let her die and stop calling emergency services. She was ready, but no one would let her go. I remember talking to my husband one night, saying, I think now is the time for a hard conversation with your mom. I know everyone loves your grandmother and wants her to be here forever, but she is literally begging us to let her die. It is what she wants. And isn't that what is most important in this moment? She wanted to be done suffering, and who is to tell someone they cannot end their life when they are suffering? Story 3. Yes, I have seen people end their lives in almost every way possible. You should be able to go out with dignity, not in the horrible manner people are experiencing now. Story 4. Yes, watching my mom die from cancer made me realize people might be at ease with controlling their ending. It is not for everyone, but it should be an option. Story 5. 100% yes. Being forced to endure unimaginable pain, with no end in sight, being bedridden with no chance of ever setting foot back on the ground or getting outside. That is not living, and it is a drain on not only the person who is imprisoned in that body, but the burden on loved ones is immense. Going out on one's own terms should be the default. We should not have to suffer. Story 6. Yes. My great-grandfather had lung cancer. He was healthy when I met him. He was a huge man with muscles from working with his hands all his life. He had been retired for years but was still regularly doing car repairs and home improvement projects for people in the community. 2 months after his diagnosis, he was like a walking skeleton. He had an episode and my aunt called the ambulance. He refused service and told us he was ready to go. So we went over to the house on Tuesday at around 1 a.m. to see him off. It was not peaceful. We had to sit there and listen to him gasping for breath, moaning in agony for 3 to 4 hours before he finally passed. That's my last memory of him. Anyone who thinks you shouldn't have the right to die with dignity in a hospital if you want to is misguided. Story 7. I think so because a lot of people suffer from autoimmune and terminal illnesses that are not curable anytime soon. I believe it should be their choice to end things on their own terms. Story 8. Yes. This should be legal in all 50 states because it provides individuals with autonomy over their end-of-life decisions and can reduce suffering for fatally ill patients. Story 9. Yes, it should be legal. Everyone deserves the right to a peaceful and dignified end on their own terms. Story 10. My mom just passed from stage 4 peritoneal cancer, one of the most painful types. I watched her starve to death for 2 months, every day wishing she didn't wake up. They were sending people in, questioning her about suicidal thoughts and such. Her cancer diagnosis was a death sentence. There was 0 chance of survival from the moment she found out. They said the 1-year survival rate was low. She barely lasted 6 months. After witnessing suffering like that, I am all for the right to choose. Your life is yours alone. Nobody should be able to tell you that you cannot die. Story 11. My parents' best friend is dying today at 3 p.m. Perth time, and he told my mum it was about dignity. He was given 3 months 3 years ago and is done. I think we all should have the right to decide when we die. Story 12. Absolutely. I mean, sure, there have to be some checks and balances, but why should someone be forced to live in pain for no good reason? Story 13. It is wild to me that we let the final days of dying occur. My son died of cancer, and for the last week of his life, he could not move, and we watched as all of his organs shut down. But because his heart was still beating, he still lived. It was an unbelievably horrible thing to watch, and I would never wish that fate on anyone. Story 14. I do not think all 50 states have mature enough legislatures or populations to handle such programs without creating unintended victims. This is not an area where a wide brush yields good results. Legal death is a necessarily meticulous process to prevent what is supposed to be mercy from turning into disposing of inconveniences. Story 15. I recently read about an American woman who went to Switzerland to die because assisted suicide is legal there. The thing is, she was 90 years old but in great health physically and mentally. She had watched her two husbands die slowly and decided she would choose her own time. She told her two sons of her plan, and when they realized there was no changing her mind, they accepted her decision. They accompanied her to Switzerland. She said her goodbyes, was given drugs through an intravenous line, and left this life before any ailment could cause her and her family misery. I would like this option for myself one day, without having to leave my home country and without having to conform to a long list of requirements. As far as I know, older Swiss individuals are not being euthanized against their will. Story 16. My father died a couple of years ago in a country where physician-assisted suicide is legal. He was provided with the drugs he needed surprisingly early in the process. He never used them and died in hospice several days after being admitted. He had a very analytical mind and was essentially incoherent in his last 2 days. I struggle with whether I wish he had exercised control over his passing, but I am glad he had the option, and I respect his choice to let nature take its course. I hope to have the option when my time comes, assuming circumstances allow. I think everyone should be allowed to make the choice. I understand the ethical challenges, particularly around dementia. Yes, there should be guardrails in place, but everyone should have the choice to die with dignity. Story 17. I think the idea that killing oneself is illegal is ridiculous in the first place, so yes, I support that there should be a way for someone to be able to end their own life if they choose to in a painless way. My only worry would be that it could be abused by bad actors. I can imagine any number of things, including murder, extortion, organ harvesting, and so on. That being said, especially the last one, if someone truly wants to end their life, a program like this could potentially be a fantastic way to donate organs and give the obviously very unhappy person some meaning and comfort in their decision. This, I suppose, opens its own moral and ethical floodgate by encouraging it. In general, yes, I think it should. Story 18. Only with ironclad safeguards against abuse. Washington state's laws are mostly all right, but most states do not go far enough. Story 19. Yes, because watching my mother-in-law over the last 3 years with Parkinson's disease and knowing she wanted to end her life before things progressed to the point of being bedbound and understanding that she cannot take care of herself in any way is heartbreaking. She has no joy, no quality of life, and knowing that she is slowly being trapped in her own body is devastating. She said her goodbyes before the dementia really set in. She is now in a semi-comatose state, but when she is awake, she asks for help over and over again. Help to die. The hospice nurses come in and assist her, her aide comes daily, and my husband and I take care of her at night. We give her pain medication to keep her comfortable, but she has not eaten in 2 weeks, barely wants water, and her body will not let her go. She is trapped. She saw it coming and asked months ago for help to end it, but we cannot assist her. We can only take care of her. She is in pain, she is scared, and all we can do is give her morphine and alprazolam to keep her sedated enough to rest. There is no dignity in this. These terminal illnesses are cruel. At least with cancer, sometimes there is a chance to get better. I believe assisted death is appropriate. She has had a do not resuscitate order for months. It is heartbreaking for my husband to know he cannot do anything more to help. We have not had a full night's sleep in 3 months. I feel like a monster hoping that every morning when I come downstairs she has passed away in the middle of the night. Mostly for her release but also for ours. Story 20. It is considered humane to end a suffering animal's life. Why not be humane to humans? The animals are not even able to agree to it. Story 21. Yes. You are conscripted into this life without a choice. It is a cruel twist to collectively disallow agency over its end as well. At some point, your own life needs to be respected as yours and yours alone to do with as you wish, including terminating it. Story 22. Yes, it is my life. I should be able to decide if it is worth living or not. Plenty of people go their whole lives being miserable. Why should we force people to do that? Story 23. In my opinion, the only inevitability in life is death, and it is your right to go out on your own terms. This may be an unpopular opinion because suicide is a complex issue, and I acknowledge that there are nuances and exceptions. However, it is what I believe. Story 24. Canadian here where we have medical assistance in dying, also known as medical assistance in dying. For people with terminal illnesses, sure. It's everything besides that is a slippery slope. Story 25. For consenting adults, yes. Some people are in constant suffering and just want to be done with it. It is hard to say what others are going through. Story 26. Yes. Why is it okay to pull the plug and let someone suffocate to death or, worse, slowly starve themselves to death? But choosing to end one's life in a painless way, rather than suffer an agonizing death, is considered morally reprehensible? Story 27. It is legal in Canada, and I am extremely grateful to know I can ensure I go out peacefully on my own terms. Story 28. I would say yes, but there needs to be absolutely no profit incentives behind it. I do not know how that would work, but if assisted suicide becomes profitable, things will get problematic. Story 29. On a smaller scale, when your pet gets diagnosed with a disease and it is hurting and withering away in front of your eyes, often we opt to put it down because we love them and do not want to see them suffer, right? Okay, well, why can't we apply that same thing to people? If someone we know and love is deteriorating and they want to be done, we should let them. We shouldn't make them wait it out. We shouldn't make them jump through hoops to survive a little bit longer, especially if it is painfully terminal, whatever it may be. I recently watched my cousin lose her husband to brain cancer, and it was brutal. It solidified my stance. Let people end it and let them do it with dignity. Let them go out on their terms and leave behind the memory that they want, not the memory of them deteriorating and suffering. Story 30. I think I would go a step further. We really ought to take away the ability of families to make the decision as to when a person should or should not be kept on life support. If you walk into most any intensive care unit, you will see one or two younger people in accidents or something that truly can be recovered from, and probably a dozen or more individuals who are 80 years or older who are being kept alive with no ability to recover. Furthermore, many of those who could recover are often deep into dementia or have very progressed diseases causing them to suffer. If you are a humanitarian, it would allow people to actually be permitted to go when family cannot make that decision, and it would also allow families to have that decision made without having it on their conscience. Most people do not want to come to terms because the average person is not mentally prepared to accept actively letting go of a loved one. Or, if you are a pragmatist, it would save a lot of hospital resources to shift to people who need them. It takes a significant amount of time, effort, and money to keep alive someone who is not able to live on their own. The average person does not have the training and experience to know when to allow a person to pass away, yet we allow them to make this decision in the United States every day. Story 31. I just watched my dad suffocate to death after discovering he had brain cancer 2 months prior because that is how you go naturally. I wished I could have eased his pain or his suffering. He was alive, but it wasn't what he would have wanted. Death with dignity should be legal. Story 32. I will only allow it to be legal once Sufjan Stevens finishes his 50-state discography. Until then, no one gets to enjoy the song Death with Dignity. Story 33. In a functioning society, yes. In a non-functioning, basically 100% profit-driven society, no. In Canada, we have had doctors offer assisted suicide to people as a way to deal with conditions that would be 100% treatable with a properly functioning social safety net. Think about it, in socialist Canada, which is left of America but unfortunately only left enough that we can claim to be better than the United States, why don't you kill yourself about it, has been offered up as a solution to treatable problems because our society doesn't want to actually help people who need it. Now imagine if assisted suicide was available in a troubled society like the United States. I wish Canada were next to a better country. Story 34. Yes. My husband shot himself. I found him still breathing. I will be in therapy for the rest of my life. I had to move from our house because my flashbacks were relentless and I could not heal where he died. All of that could have been avoided. Story 35. The actor who played Odo on Star Trek Deep Space Nine, René Auberjonois, died in 2019 at age 79 via assisted suicide through medication in California because he had metastatic lung cancer. I think suicide is a human right, even though I believe suicide is a tragedy. It is a fatal decision to escape suffering. Everybody dies, so each person's death is either consensual and in their control regarding how and when it happens and how painful it is, or non-consensual and out of their control regarding how or when it happens and how agonizing it is. In some cases, a person's quality of life can improve, so suicide is unreasonable, but in other cases, a person's quality of life will never improve and only decline, so suicide is a choice they make which will prevent further suffering for them. If someone never chooses to end their life, they are gambling with their own existence, risking an extremely agonizing death. The number of bad, agonizing ways to die vastly outnumbers the number of good, painless ways to die. There are painless ways to end one's life, and it is much more humane than natural deaths, or even someone dying of old age. It is much more dangerous to let your inevitable death be up to chance than to have some control over how and when you finally exit. Ending one's life can be a rational decision. If you do not choose your own death, then random chance will choose for you, and the odds are it will be agonizing. Story 36. Yes, with proper regulation. It is selfish to force people to suffer just because of one's religious beliefs. Story 37. Worldwide. If a person cannot choose to end their own life, then in what sense are they genuinely autonomous? In what way do they truly have agency? We did not get to choose life, and we are not allowed to choose death. That is unacceptable. Story 38. Conceptually, yes. However, I do not trust this country to do it without accidentally doing eugenics. Story 39. I never understood why we would humanely euthanize an animal, but my dad had to suffer terminally from the inside out. Story 40. I think it should be. I spent the afternoon sitting by the hospital bed of my 95-year-old father, who is approaching the end of his life. He was asleep for most of my visit. The only sound he was making was groans. He hasn't eaten in 3 days. We've told him he can go, but he's not. I guess he's too stubborn. My sister, who has his medical power of attorney, has luckily managed to keep the hospital from ignoring his advance directives, but every time the staff changes, she has to go through it again. My husband has 2 terminal illnesses. According to his doctor, he should have died 2 years ago. He's stubborn. Our state allows death with dignity, and he told me on Friday that he was going to apply for it soon. Our state does it by sending you the medications to take, and you take them when you are ready to go. Story 41. Yes, we should have bodily autonomy, which includes the right to die with dignity. My boyfriend has had cancer for over 10 years. Right now it is managed, but he has been told several times to get his affairs in order. If things go very badly, his current plan is to overdose on heroin out in the woods after an epic camping trip with his loved ones. I fully support this. He should get to decide to die in a way that precludes the slow onslaught of death and pain due to a cancer diagnosis. During his last cycle of chemotherapy, the patient next door lost his battle, and it was absolutely heart-wrenching. He does not want to die in a sterile hospital room hooked up to machines. It is like at-home euthanasia for dogs. A quick death at home surrounded by loved ones is the way to go. Story 42. I think so. It would be a better alternative to suffering. I had a coworker who was dying of an incurable disease. After consulting with doctors and a psychiatrist, he received a prescription for a combination of medications that would end his life peacefully. He was able to dictate his final days, say his goodbyes, and avoid a long and painful death. Story 43. Yes, for a few reasons. This isn't 1955 anymore. Most people aren't practicing any religion. There shouldn't be any stigma against suicide. If I have a bad day, I should be allowed to walk in front of a train and end it all, or better yet, just take a drug cocktail and fall asleep forever. Who cares if I commit suicide? Why should someone have to suffer through some horrible disease like cancer, or amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, which slowly paralyzes you completely, then causes you to stop breathing when it destroys your autonomic nervous system? Let them have what life they have left before they suffer. then let them go. I watched my mother-in-law die from amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. That's got to be one of the worst ways to go naturally since it takes your freedom of movement over years. Sadly, coming up, there are going to be a lot of people who wind up on the bad end of the economic spectrum. Two examples I can think of are hundreds of millions of knowledge workers who get fired because of artificial intelligence and literally have no way to earn money, and millions of seniors in the United States who have no retirement savings and uncertain propositions for Social Security. It should be a law that assisted suicide is allowed after you have withdrawn the last amounts from your savings and have sold your large possessions, such as a house or a car. Otherwise, you are going to have seniors dying from poverty and starvation. Story 44. It should be legal. It should not be recommended. That is the issue they are having in Canada. It should go through the same process as getting a do not resuscitate order. Story 45. I don't think people should have a right to control whether or not you give up or give out. In the wild, animals leave the pack all the time to go out into the middle of nowhere and die. I don't see why humans have to suffer just because people think we are better than a dog. Story 46. Death from Alzheimer's is extremely horrific. I would argue there is easily a point in the illness where death with dignity should be allowed. Story 47. Everyone has the inalienable right to decide for themselves the conditions they are willing to live under, to decide for themselves when they have had enough, and the means or method of when and how. We put down pets when they are suffering, but refuse to allow grandma or grandpa the same dignity or relief. Story 48. Yes, but it needs controls to ensure it is not abused, such as preventing the dismissal of individuals simply due to their age. I think it should require the agreement of two unrelated doctors and possibly a social worker to confirm that the person is terminal and that a painful death is imminent. Story 49. Absolutely. It is wild to me that we treat animals with more compassion in this particular regard than we do humans. People should be free to do what they want with their own bodies, including the choice to end prolonged suffering. Unfortunately, we are regressing in so many ways. Story 50. Legal in all 50 states. This implies we are talking about federal law. I do not believe this is a federal issue unless there is a good argument that it is a right guaranteed by the Constitution. I have not heard such an argument. I do support all 50 states passing their own laws allowing this. Story 51. I think it is going to be an inevitability when we have an entire generation of people unable to afford retirement and elder care. They are going to send us nice little do-it-yourself kits like in Children of Men, though let us be real, the government would never. They will just sell them on Amazon for $12.99. Story 52. Yes, somebody with a sound mind who is suffering unbearably with no solution to their suffering should be able to end their life, in my opinion. Story 53. Yes, I wish this would present a serious challenge so we could see large pharmaceutical companies and the health insurance industry lose their composure over the perceived losses. Story 54. Rough topic. I wholeheartedly believe if you willingly do not want to exist, there should be practical, humane options available to you. The horrors of the situations insurance companies would impose on people terrify me, though. Why must all freedoms be abused to the point where they are not even allowed? A person cannot even choose to end their life in comfort anymore. Assuming I am not misunderstanding the death with dignity reference. Story 55. Freedom is not being able to tell people what to do with their lives. As long as you are not hurting anyone else, who am I to tell you how to live your life? If you want to check out of this challenging situation early, more power to you. Story 56. Absolutely. If you have ever watched someone you love suffer through a terminal disease, the end stages are very difficult, brutal, and people should absolutely, in my opinion, have a right to decide to go humanely. Story 57. Yes. In all the world. My country doesn't even really enforce do not resuscitate at the federal level, and as a chronically ill patient it makes me distrust the healthcare system to the point where I've preferred to just ride out medical crises at home instead of going to the hospital just because I'm too scared to get that decision taken away from me. I'm not saying I'd jump at the chance to get medical assistance in dying tomorrow if it was available, but it would give me so much peace of mind if it was an option here for when, not if, I need it. Story 58. My grandmother, she was an Alzheimer's patient. While this may seem harsh, the person who finally passed away was not my grandmother. She stopped being any sort of parental figure when she stopped talking. She was unable to feed herself. She was unable to bathe herself. She was unable to walk or communicate in pretty much any meaningful way. How is that living with dignity? It's not. Now, if it were a few days or if there was a cure on the horizon, that would have been one thing. She was in that state for 7 years. 7 long years where the rest of us watched her decline more and more. My siblings and I have already agreed that if any of us are in that state, just take us on a last road trip. We don't care if it's in some field somewhere, off the top of the mountain into a gorge, or dropping our body into the ocean in a large seal box. Going out that way is more humane for them and for me. Story 59. As someone who has survived cancer twice and has a terminal autoimmune disease, yes, absolutely. During the course of treatment, it was discovered that I do not react to opioids in any way, so comfort care, such as hospice, is impossible for me. I sat with a friend in hospice and he died poorly. No one should have to endure that. Story 60. Yes, we do not get any say regarding our birth. We should at least be able to make a decision regarding our own death. There would be far less of a trauma ripple if this were the case. Story 61. Every human should be able to make what I would argue is the most important choice of their life, the way they would like to pass on. Story 62. Yes, but I think there should be strict regulations and qualifications. It is an idea that could spiral out of control if not closely monitored and regulated. Story 63. Yes. There are many reasons for it, and also some reasons against it, though I believe the reasons to allow it far outweigh the reasons to forbid it. Most of these reasons are for the comfort and desires of the one passing, as well as the well-being of those who have to provide care for them. If anyone is interested, I highly recommend watching the documentary The Suicide Tourist, all the way through, as it details a 56-year-old man's desire to die with dignity before his amyotrophic lateral sclerosis fully paralyzes him. My philosophy professor had my class watch it as part of our discussion on euthanasia. It doesn't leave anything out, and you even watch the moment of death as he takes the medicine. Story 64. Medically induced euthanasia should be a part of any advance directive or do not resuscitate filing. Should someone deteriorate or find themselves in such a state as to want to end their lives, their wishes to die can be honored. If a patient wishes to die, to be honest, that is their prerogative, and to rescind a do not resuscitate order and keep someone alive should be a breach of the Hippocratic Oath. At that point, you are not extending life, you are prolonging suffering. If a patient is suffering and wants to die, that should honestly be their choice and nobody else's. Doctors ought to give terminal or palliative patients the option to sign or order a directive that allows for them to medically terminate their own lives in addition to other options like continuance of care or hospice. In a similar vein, suicide should not be criminalized in the United States. Yes, it is a criminal offense to attempt suicide in parts of the country. Should you automatically receive mental health treatment? Absolutely. Should you be automatically enrolled in counseling services and observed until it is determined you are no longer a threat to yourself or others? Absolutely. Should treatment extend past the point of inpatient therapy? Absolutely. But should you be able to be criminally prosecuted and labeled a felon for attempting suicide? Absolutely not. And it is partially the stigma that drives the overwhelmingly negative views America has toward mental health diagnosis and treatment. Story 65. Yes, people should be allowed to choose their own fate. Forcing them to live a life of pain and suffering is selfish and cruel. This process should thoroughly account for and attempt to correct problems that can be solved to improve quality of life, but the final decision about your fate should never be in the hands of someone else. The alternative to death with dignity is someone ending their own life in ways that harm their surroundings. Not only does that, for some, make the decision more difficult and force them to suffer more as they do not wish to burden others, but it also impacts the lives of those who have to deal with the fallout. No one should be so desperate as to jump in front of a train. There should be a better way. Story 66. Emphatic yes, and we should accommodate people with dementia. My mother has dementia and lives in Oregon, a state particularly accommodating to death with dignity. Every conversation I have with her, she asks me to not let her be like that, meaning to be completely devoid of mind or personality. For me, That means not letting her get to the profoundly humiliating stage of being a poop doll. It is horrible. People should not be forced to live beyond their personalities and minds. The problem with death with dignity as it is now is that at a diagnosis of 6 months to live, the standard to be eligible, a person with dementia is by definition not in their right mind and therefore not capable of making that decision according to the law. What my mom has done is have multiple conversations with me and my sister, her doctor, and her friends about how she wants death with dignity. She has stated it in her will and in the durable power of attorney my sister and I have. She has an advance directive. She signed a physician orders for life-sustaining treatment, although that was given to us in error as it is too early, but I still have the signed document in my possession. She had us start a log of conversations in which she states she wants death with dignity. We have so much knowledge and documentation of her desires that it should be a no-brainer. But I am anticipating a legal challenge because she will not exist as a person by the time her body fails. The other methods, voluntary refusal of food and water, resulting in death by starvation, getting an infection like pneumonia or a urinary tract infection that proceeds to sepsis, having someone give an overdose of opiates. All I want is for my mom to die with dignity. I want her to not spend the last of her evaporating synapses living in terror that she is eventually going to be walking around naked, holding her own waist like it's a doll. It is absolutely absurd that we have death with dignity, but we do not accommodate people with dementia who are thus doomed to prolong their own and their family's agony just because their disease killed their brain before their body. Story 67. Yes. No one should be forced to live when they no longer want to. Illness, depression, constant pain, whatever the reason. If someone does not want to be alive anymore but does not want to end their life in that way, I believe they should have another option. I am strongly supportive of this. If I were older and had a chronic illness and was suffering, I would want that option. Story 68. The right to life is one of the first tenets allotted to us in the Constitution. By that logic, a right to death must be an equal right. Story 69. If your loved one died suffering a prolonged death at a hospital, thank Christianity and all its devoted followers. Story 70. Yes, the United States is always so slow to adopt changes compared to Canada. It has been legal nationally here for almost an entire decade. Get with the program. The United States has been slow regarding marijuana legislation, and it was also slow with same-sex marriage. Such a focus on the past. Story 71. Yes. If you afford the mercy of a dignified death to a pet that you love, it is insulting not to extend that same courtesy to another human. Safeguards also need to be in place to prevent abuse of the elderly. Story 72. I say yes. It is what I would want for myself, and although I cannot say whether my grandmother would have wanted it, I think she might have been given some agency since she was diagnosed with bone cancer and had been declining for several years due to dementia. She was thankfully only alive for a few weeks after her cancer diagnosis, but she likely had been dealing with chronic pain and injuries from bone density reduction for years. Her anxiety with doctors meant she did not go often, so there is no way of knowing. I am presumptively glad she only had a few weeks post-diagnosis where we know for certain she was dealing with it. Story 73. If it's obvious someone is passing, I do believe that they should at least have the right to choose whether to go naturally or not. I literally ask my girlfriend every time death is brought up to take me out back and just shoot me. I don't want to suffer with bed sores, voices, and the whole 9 yards. Obviously, she is not going to do that, but still. Story 74. Yes, we allow our pets to pass away with dignity. It seems unfair that humans are not afforded the same courtesy. If the quality of life is so low that one is not enjoying life, especially in the case of dementia, it can be even more difficult. If I were to develop dementia, I would want to be allowed to depart while I am still remembered positively, not after I have lost all my friends and family because I have asked the same question multiple times in one day due to my memory loss. There is no point in staying here. It feels like sheer torture. Story 75. I think it should be up to the states to decide, but I am for it. I am glad I live in a state that allows a person to die on their own terms with medical assistance instead of suffering. I know of someone who had amyotrophic lateral sclerosis and actually traveled to my state to die with dignity. Story 76. I look at it this way. If we have the compassion to end a sick pet's suffering, Why wouldn't we honor the request of a sentient being who is suffering and has the agency to tell us? Story 77. Yes, and to be honest, it should be legal for family members to opt for euthanasia when someone is too far gone to make that decision for themselves. Story 78. I work in veterinary medicine, and sometimes a painless death is the best thing you can do for a beloved pet. Why not let a human make that choice as well? Story 79. You will need it now that Medicaid is being removed. Your seniors will be expected to end their lives. Sound harsh? It is because you voted for a fascist. Story 80. I think that there is an extremely compelling argument to be made for it, as many of the top voted comments here point out. If euthanasia is used for the sole reason to free someone who is terminally ill from suffering, I would be all for it. The problem, however, lies with the other incentive structures that fall in place after euthanasia is legalized. Take Canada, for example, where we see the highest rates of medically assisted suicide and where mental illness has recently been added to the list of valid reasons to be considered for it. It is essentially the final form of a failed welfare state, where instead of actual treatment, doctors can recommend suicide, thus ending the patient's financial burden on the state. I am not saying that there cannot be a solution in between these extremes. It is just extremely likely that once it is fully legalized, the financial incentives are aligned toward creating a situation that we are currently seeing unravel in Canada, where you have doctors recommending suicide to people in cases where that is completely unethical and barbaric. And of course, when it was legalized in 2016 in Canada, all of the proponents were saying that it would only be used to help terminally ill patients avoid unnecessary suffering. Some slopes are indeed slippery. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.